All right, Alex, thank you. Hard to believe, but this Sunday marks 21 years since the September 11th attacks on the Twin Towers. This weekend, someone who survived the attack on the World Trade Center will be speaking here in the Tri-Cities. Kelly Grossfield has more.
Thanks for joining us. Today we're here with someone special, Sujo John, who was in the 9/11 attacks, and I understand you're speaking in Bristol this weekend. Welcome, Sujo, and go ahead and tell me a little bit about what's going on.
Well, I'm so excited to be speaking to your audience, especially folks in the Bristol, Virginia area. I'm excited to be speaking at Covenant Fellowship this weekend, this Sunday morning, for a special 9/11 remembrance event where first responders will be recognized. So I live in Dallas, but my story is about how me and my wife, we both survived one of the greatest attacks upon America almost 21 years ago. But it's also a time when not only when we remember about what happened and we pay honor to those that died that day, but it's also a time of reflection for us to be mindful about the brave heroes that live in our communities who go out the way to make sure that communities are safe and America is safe. So this weekend, as I speak, we will be honoring first responders in your community.
And I want to talk a little bit about your experience. Even though it was 21 years ago, I'm sure it still feels pretty fresh looking back on that day. And you said your wife also survived. I mean, the information I have here says she was 4 months pregnant at the time. Go ahead and just go back to that day.
Correct. It's actually 3 lives that were spared because she was pregnant at that time. And it's very hard to believe that it's almost 21 years, but this weekend will be 21 years since that day. But this year, it's kind of interesting. It's kind of significant almost because as everyone watching would know that just a few weeks ago, America took out one of the main conspirators and someone who actually planned the whole thing, Alman Zawahiri, was taken out in Afghanistan, in Kabul. And so because 9/11 kind of changed our way of life, the way we live and the way we travel and the way we engage with some countries around the world. And so many Americans have died in wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. So it doesn't, it's hard to believe that it's 21 years, right? But for me and my wife, it's a day that we will never forget because our personal experience that day, I would work on the 81st floor of the North Tower of the World Trade Center. My wife would work on the 71st floor of the South Tower, 4 months pregnant. And that fateful day, it started off as a clear, cloudless day. I'm on the 81st floor, and about 8:46 in the morning, I hear this incredible explosion. And this is American Flight 11 flying coast to coast from Boston to LA, flying at 440 miles an hour, carrying 10,000 gallons of jet fuel. It comes crashing into our tower. The plane struck several floors above us, but the angle at which the plane went in the building meant that part of the wing of the plane tears into our floor, dumps jet fuel, fire breaks on our floor. The walls around us collapsing. We thought that building was going down. So my story is about how I came down 81 floors, what I witnessed while I was running down the stairwell, and how I came down 81 floors and I walked towards the South Tower to be looking for her. And that's when the second tower collapses and I was trapped in the debris. So I'm looking forward to sharing that experience of having faced death, but also the story of how we all go through stories. My story is about a building collapsing, but people watching me, you have a story. Something in your life might be falling apart or collapsing at this time. But how do we become resilient through the ups and downs of life? How do we deal with the valleys of our life? Because we all of them will go through that. That is life. So it's a story about how I survived, story about how my wife, she was late to work, and that's how she was spared. But it's also a story about how our unborn child at that time, now he's 20, how his life was spared. So we are grateful for the fact that our lives were spared and the path that God has put me on since that day. And it's a journey that I never thought I would be on, but I find myself in this. And now I get to come and share that story 21 years later in your community this weekend.
Is it difficult sharing this story? I mean, just telling it over and over again. I'm sure in the beginning it was tough. Maybe it get easier with time.
Yeah, that's a great question. In fact, it has got a lot easier than it was in the beginning. It used to be very difficult in the beginning for a couple of reasons for me to relive that day, but also the fact that, many survivors or family members who had lost loved ones would show up in my events wanting to know more details about what exactly happened that day for some closure. It doesn't seem to me that it's been 21 years. For those who went through that experience, we still remember everything we saw and experienced. Almost, I can still remember what it smelled like that day, the smoke, the heat. Those are memories that's deeply etched in our minds, and it's almost like every day I think of that day. So yeah, it has kind of marked us forever, but it also is a time for us collectively in America to be mindful of the fact that there are men and women who put their lives at risk, some in far off places around the world, some in our communities, to make sure that such a thing doesn't happen all over again. And that is the most important thing for us 21 years later, to realize that there is an enemy that threatens America, and we cannot go slow on our attack against them. And we have to be mindful of that, but also recognize that in our country, whether if there to be any kind of an attack or an emergency, there are these amazing, brave heroes among us that will respond, just like those firemen and policemen that I met on 9/11 that laid down their lives so that others like me are around to be sharing our story. So it's a mixed day where many thoughts run through the minds of almost every American who watched that tragedy happen.
Sujo, thank you so much for sharing your story. And again, you'll be sharing that story in Bristol this weekend. We have all the information you need to know right here on your screen. Sujo, again, thank you so much for joining us.